Let's talk about the reform now as proposed and what you think should happen. Speak first to the big banks here and why you think that that's the elephant in the room, and if not addressed, this reform won't really solve it.
I mean, we still have a TBTF system, too big to fail system, where the banks that are that big, the Goldmans, the Citis, the Morgan Chases, Bank of America, will have now an explicit guarantee of the federal government behind them, which will permit them to have not only a competitive advantage against their competitors, but also, given that downside risk that's covered by the federal government, they will participate in risky activity without having to bear the risk at the end, because we are still socializing the risk and permitting them to take the upside, privatizing the game.
The administration, though, says under their proposal that those big banks are going to have to put money into the kitty here.
They're going to be putting in such a small amount relative to the upside they get that there's still going to be an asymmetry between risk and reward. That asymmetry is what got us into trouble in the first place. The better solution, and this is one that has been proposed by Joe Stiglitz, it's been one proposed by Simon Johnson, both very serious academics, and to an extent by Paul Volcker, obviously the great eminence here, is break up the big banks. TBTF is, in my view, too big to fail, is too big not to fail because of the structure behind them. We did better for decades with a system of smaller, atomized banks, break it down both in terms of asset size and functionality. Now, the problem that is created, in addition to all the other problems, by this welter of conflicts within the banks, when they're doing everything, cross-marketing, cross-selling, they cannot mediate the tensions and conflicts any better than any other organization, creates problems.
Let's say there's not a political will to break up the banks. Could there be a level of transparency and legitimate balance sheets that the government at some point could say, whoa, you're heading off a cliff here. I'm gonna veer you off before you get there?
Possible, but very hard to see. In other words, do regulators ever have sufficient will? And I don't say this as though I'm damning them as a universe of people, but how often have they really had the willpower to look at a significant institution and say, we're breaking you up? It's happened, and it's been done wisely, and this is what I think we should do now with the banks. Standard Oil,
phone companies,
AT&T. I mean, those are two examples of divestitures that worked. We got real competition. Over time, they created real value. Look what happened to telecom when we broke up AT&T.
Yep.
I'm not saying direct causation, but certainly the investment, the capacity, to the technological investment, everything exploded in a good way after that. We should do the same thing, I think, with our financial services sector. Step back from the Abacus deal for a second, the one at the heart of the Goldman case, and ask yourself this question. What purpose did all that serve? Because here we have Goldman and ACA and Paulson and the European banks as investors. What are they doing? Does all of this stuff serve any social purpose?
Well, not yet, but what I don't get is why. Because the payout to the bank wasn't, from a risk-reward standpoint, that's the part I still don't understand about. Why go down that road when you don't need the money?
Well, these guys are always looking for an advantage on the ricochet. And what we've done is create this unbelievably arcane financial services system where those are the sorts of products they create. And honestly, I wish all that brain power were off creating a better widget somewhere so we could make something to sell to real people and create jobs producing things rather than sitting on Wall Street shuffling paper.
Finally, Elliot, the money here. It has been so difficult to stomach. Y'all had all but pitchforks a little over a year ago to some of the suburban enclaves around the city. Is there a way to regulate? It's capitalism, God bless it, but how do you make sure these bonus payouts don't get to a point where it not only, all but, instigates folks to take some actions that aren't, let's say, in anybody's best interest?
Look, part of it, and I'm a little older than you, so I can say part of it is I'm beginning to feel my generation has failed. I'm 50. The generation of leadership right now on Wall Street lost its sense of bearings, lost its sense of a social contract. If you look back to the Felix Rowatons, those who were in charge of the investment banks 20 years ago, yes, they got paid well. They certainly got paid very nicely and accrued wealth, but there was not this sense of excess. There was not a Gordon Gekko greed is good moment for them because there was a sense of a social contract. So part of it may just be that's broken down and we need to rebuild that. Part of it is regulators who lost a sense of controlling leverage ratios and looking at the underlying risk within a portfolio and reining it in, although it's hard to understand, and even the CEOs may not have understood it. Part of it is shareholders. Shareholders need to awaken. Now, the shareholders of Goldman or the other banks could stand up and say, wait a minute, you guys shouldn't be paid that much. On the other hand, when the stock was flying high, they're not likely to do that. So at every one of these levels, things have broken down. It is a social structure.
But you can almost see Glenn Beck getting his props ready to that answer and say, Eliot Spitzer wants socialism, and even guys on the street saying, hey, listen, you don't give me what I can make here, I'm going to some sovereign wealth fund, or I'm going to some hedge fund here.
Everybody's got to ratchet it down and across the board, and we can do so as shareholders and as regulators. And here's my response to them. I'm the true capitalist. What they're playing is a game of corporate socialism off the back of the taxpayers. They have had trillions of dollars of subsidies to subsidize their bonuses and their takeout. I'm the one who, from the very beginning, when I got to the Attorney General's office and made these cases, said, what you're creating will break down and fail and destroy capitalism and require this enormous subsidy to resurrect yourself, and it will be bad for the market, bad for jobs, bad for people. True capitalists don't believe in that degree of excess, and true capitalists wouldn't have stood by and let them get bailed out. So the true capitalism is the one that just depends upon competition and sound judgment all the way through, not upon a taxpayer bailout at the end of the day.
All right, finally, last question about Albany.
Right.
It's a punchline as always, but it's funny, I interviewed Governor Patterson, and I found almost a tortured answer when he talked about what was going on Wall Street, because as governor, you need this bonus revenue, especially in these tough economic times with the budgets and the chasm you have for the numbers you got to make up. How difficult is that to navigate? Because I know down deep he's like, but
look, it's not hard to navigate. You got to do what is ethical and what is right when it comes to Wall Street. Otherwise, it won't last. And I saw an editorial in a newspaper yesterday, I believe it was, saying, "Don't be hard on Wall Street. We depend upon the money." I said, "Come on, guys. That is an answer that lasts a week, because 2 weeks from now, when they crash again, there won't be an industry left. You've got to make it sustainable." Albany has to deal with the fact that we had a bubble that generated a lot of revenue, that led to a lot of state spending that right now can't be sustained. The paradigm has shifted. This is not a criticism of those who looked at it back then and said, we've got the revenue, let's use it well. But the reality is, the objective facts right now are we cannot afford that level of spending. There's simply no other way around it. We've got to do better with what we've got, make tough decisions, and that means from schools to hospitals to every area, we've got to do better with a more limited budget.
Finally, Ed Koch, we spoke to a week ago, and he said, basically, before I die, I want to see all the bums thrown out, meaning of Albany, that it has gotten so bad and so incestuous that you need a clearing out of it. You know it as well as anybody. Has it reached that level?
Look, I'm not willing to say they're all bad people. They're people responding to the incentives that they face, just the way Wall Street did, just the way everybody does. We need a fundamental restructuring based upon the fact that the revenue line went from here to here. People have not adjusted to that. They're still responding to interest groups that live off a revenue line that looks like this, not like this. They're not willing to make hard decisions, not willing to get rid of the waste and the excess and face up to it. They're not all evil, but yeah, I had huge fights with the legislature, and everybody remembers those. I was standing up for what I thought was right, and I hope people agree with me. Maybe not, doesn't matter at this point. But yes, there are a lot of them who have to either wake up to this reality or they should be voted out.
Eliot Spitzer, thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Thank you.